A reading of my book, Reality's Fragility, an investigation into my life's dilemmas in verse. Joe Beninati. Introduction. Dear reader, thank you for choosing to read this little book of poetry. I had difficulty in the structuring of this book, since all my poems are really standalone. Nevertheless, I was able to follow the seasons and created 5 parts to the book: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I added the 5th overarching season of no time. Although my attempt to make the themes was a bit challenging, I think I have succeeded in creating a worthwhile thematic progression. This book is also a bit of a spiritual biography. Although the sections are not truly chronological, they represent somewhat the seasons in my lifetime, with the final section transcending the first 4. This was rather an afterthought, as I tried to make sense by making poems fit into a classification that poetry does not easily accommodate to. But as can be seen, conformity has not exactly been the rule for my poetry, nor for my life. I do adhere to E. E. Cummings' statement, to be nobody but yourself, in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else, means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight, and never stop fighting. It is difficult to classify the subject matter of my poetry. Much of this poetry challenges traditional perceptions of the reality that we accept to be real. Whether my perception is true or false in an absolute sense did not matter to me, as this is a work of poetry and not an investigation into the science of being. In conclusion, I would like to add that although I have been influenced deeply by the poetry of E. E. Cummings, I do think that this work stands on its own. I try to adhere to 3 principles of poetics. 1. Every poem must have a musical quality and is meant to be read aloud. I have not followed the ideal of visual poetry, as it usually cannot be spokingly sung. 2. Each poem must have some subject matter of both interest and importance to the reader. Its depth depends on the direction of the poem. 3. Each poem needs to have a clear denouement that ties the poem together and gives the reader some conclusion. I hope that every reader finds some pleasure and insight in this poetry. I would also state that most of this poetry was written through me rather than by me.
Forward to Joe Beninati's Reality's Fragility. Barry Maurer, Associate Professor of English, University of Central Florida, and seasonal resident of Nova Scotia. There is a writers group in Annapolis, Royal, Nova Scotia, organized by Ted Layton, which meets twice a month on Wednesdays at the Arts Place Gallery. Typically, a half-dozen writers share their work, and sometimes others come to listen. I began attending in 2024 when meetings were held at the Mad Hatter Wine Bar, and was surprised to find a group of extraordinary writers, each with a distinct style. They also turned out to be extremely likable and interesting people, and I felt quite at home. I wouldn't meet Joe Beninati until 2025, and then only once at the Arts Place Gallery. Upon hearing him read a handful of poems at the meeting, I bought his first book, Shadows I've Seen. I read it in a disordered way, selecting pages at random, unable to take in more than a few poems at a time. I was reminded of the quote from Walter Benjamin about his reading of Louis Aragon's Paris Peasant. Evenings lying in bed, I could never read more than 2 to 3 pages by him because my heart started to pound so hard that I had to put the book down. The pounding excitement I felt might seem odd with Beninati's work, given that most of his poems strike a quiet, contemplative tone. But my excitement came from the profound sense of possibility Beninati's poems opened, which was due in large part to their musicality and intense economy. The profound number of inferences his lines raised using the bare minimum of words. What if I could think this way, write this way, live this way? I've written song lyrics and an occasional poem for over 3 decades, and there have only been a few occasions in which I felt my writing had the qualities that I saw consistently in Beninati's work: honesty, openness, and revelation. Beninati's poetry always conveys the sense of epiphany, and the epiphany arises not just from observing, but from writing. It reminds me of another quote by Joan Didion: "I don't know what I think until I write it down." But Beninati's poetry takes a stand against thinking, and that's one of the things that is so striking about it. His poetry sets the failure of human thought against the genius of nature, as in this poem from Shadows I've Seen. A complicated willfulness that sun sets and winds chuckle about, not the geese, not the robins, not even the crows. Man's mind conjures up no's and yeses and foolish pretenses. Bees don't, trees don't, and even the worms don't collide with time's subtle mind. This poem is one of 3 from Shadows I've Seen that I've set to music so far. I'd be happy to share the tunes with you, dear reader, if you ask. The ease with which I was able to match his words to music made my appreciation of Beninati's work grow. Beninati is attuned to the pleasure of language, the way it fits mouth and ear, and the pleasure that language can have when it is used to intimate rather than to communicate. Though Shadows I've Seen proved that Beninati had nothing more to prove as a poet, he's given us another book that adds to his legacy, which surprises everywhere. Take, for example, this stanza with its humorous paradoxes. "Oh, the immeasurable strength of my lackadaisical lack of acumen." Beninati's poetry has such a profound sense of play and musicality about it because he understands the importance of economy and silence. It's not how many notes you can play or how dazzling your virtuosity. It's how much space you leave for the listener to create the music. Great musicians like Thelonious Monk understood that, and like great musical works, Beninati's poetry is never merely about theme or subject, but about the art itself. Even when Beninati is not explicitly reflecting on poetry as making, his poems are reflexively about poetry. An example from Shadows I've Seen is a poem about the horizon at sunset titled Night's Black Arms, another one I've set to music. It includes these lines: "The accurate landscape's compass has one only dimension now." I'm struck by how strange and yet how necessary each word choice is. Why accurate instead of actual? Why one only instead of the more syntactically common only one? Why dimension instead of direction? These word choices push against the familiar uses of language, enacting Victor Shklovsky's definition of art as estrangement, with the goal being to make the stone stony. Here the stone is not only the horizon, but language itself. We must practice accurate landscape's compass and one only dimension until they become new neural pathways. Beninati's guiding star has been E. Cummings, and he's explicit in crediting his inspiration, though he by no means slavishly follows Cummings. Rather, his practice is, as Matsuo Basho advised, not to follow in the footsteps of the masters, but to seek what they sought. Cummings has 2 identities as a poet, one as a lyricist and one as an experimentalist who shifted from language as oral to language as visual, taking advantage of the page as a space of possibilities. Beninati's interests lie primarily with the oral, but his poetry is not without visual play. In a possible homage to one of Cummings' most arresting visual poems, Grasshopper, Beninati includes these lines: Not a raging storm, not even cicadas call, not crickets grumble, dare interrupt the space that silence commands, and so punctuates. Here, as in Cummings' poem, the grasshopper cricket is not the subject, but is an opportunity to recover experience. In Cummings' poem, the perception of recognition, the chaotic sense impressions that occur before we are able to identify that we experienced a grasshopper's leap, and here the experience of silence in space with its interruptions and punctuations, a reorientation of figure and ground. Mostly what I take from Beninati's poetry is Ereignis, which in common German means event. James Magrini, summarizing Heidegger's use of the term, defines it as the lighting and clearing event of truth's happening, aletheia, the temporal event of appropriation of the historical destining of being. It is not something to be understood as much as experienced, as one undergoes a ritual transformation, caterpillar to butterfly. Ereignis is not available to the representative calculative thinker and to individual experiences of men. It is rather given to the essential thinker, the poetic dweller, the seer and the shepherd, in his realization of his belonging together with being. Event of appropriation is that realm, vibrating within itself through which man and being reach each other in their nature. But what is being? In Beninati's afterword to this book, he writes, "The question that I have explored in this work is the nature of reality and how it is transient and fragile, as dew on the morning flower that we see, then we don't." This sentiment aligns with the crux of modernism, as articulated by Charles Baudelaire in 1860. The modernist strives for his own part to extract from the fashionable whatever it may contain of the poetical within the historical, to draw the eternal from the transitory. But Beninati is less interested in culture than in nature, including the nature of his aging and changing body, and this aligns him more with Hermetic traditions. In this tradition, his poems serve as an athanor, an alchemical womb crucible, distilling out an occult quintessence from mundane ingredients. Beninati's work is a show and tell of Ereignis and Athanor. From it, we should produce more songs.
Reality's fragility. Of all the things mankind's forced to live with, reality's fragility and Mother Nature's unpredictability stand out. What I mean is, I think that nature already stands in absolute perfection and does not seem to either recognize or care about mankind's obsession to make more perfect what is already so. Only mankind has billionaires waging wars to only gather more. They too come to the same end as the poor peasants they offend. Only mankind is fool enough to wage war on Mother Nature's absolute control. Waves follow waves. Trees stand tall against all manner of wind and snow and rain. Birds gather when they gather, and they shudder in December's rain. It's just a case of mankind's silly games, who for a meager minute pretend grandiosity and all the rest until frail, fresh leaves, dry, skeletal remains that archaeology is thrilled about. The way that goes nowhere has been postulated for ages, but none seems soft enough to follow what is right before one's eyes. And so the history of mankind repeats ad infinitum and has no worthwhile legacy for innocent infant eyes. Part 1. The Spring of Dawn. Poem number 1. Brightly dawn struck the icy snow, as trees' shadows cut through like charcoal. A vagrant star from last night's tomb remains, the high guardian in the silent sky. And like that cold star, I seem to shine a very little shine in this barely bright dawn, daily birthing new. A little self with still simple eyes witnesses this birthing creation as dawn's stillness hides a star's fiery magma. Poem number 2. Dawn before 50. We must now receive this broken heart. Pieces fall apart like weary petals down at trees' feet. And toes don't care whether withered faces stare or slowly blink out. How can wither carry one stamen's thought of seaman's hope? When this remnant of a once vigorous builder can be blown away by gentle air. Now a waterless blunder, broken with shame and cracked, tells tall tales of trauma's truths. Shining once maples, winter's doom now gapes graves. Poem number 3. This day's dawn cleared out all of yesterday's frigid, frightful storm that seemed never to end. This dawn is silent and cold, with the sun brightening up North Mountain's charm, hidden by the raging storm. I cleared my pathways to here and there like the dawn did. I found my heart relieved of some troublesome strings that held me in some past delusion. The bright light of sun brings joy to the tops of the mountain, as the fog risen above the river hangs in delightful suspense and outlines the white meadow. The trees, rattled by the storms, carry now the weight of white delight, marking a winter celebration, with ornaments of dark gray and the light pink clouds overhead, and an unmistakable gaggle of geese head east. Poem number 4. Dawn never comes with a bang. Dawn has come. It was a dawn of dew, with no clocks ringing or bells tolling. No, just a soft sneaking below night's dark dome. With no hesitation she rose. Dawn's in no hurry. She just opens her gown by imperceptible degrees, surrounding all of me and mine. Her rise is majestically slow, and if I blinked, I could witness the marvel of her birthing light. Dawn arrives to brighten night's happy dark that's ready to put itself to sleep again. Finally, dawn fills all of the horizon as the trees stand in awe, patiently waiting for spring's certainty. Poem number 5. The first uncertain light of dawn. Dawn's first light is quite uncertain, as though testing Earth's waters to see if she will be accepted. Dawn's first light is but a hint that pushes aside what seems a permanent night. Dawn's first light seems shy about showing her subtle face in a sky that seems barely willing to budge. But peace comes as it always does, as first light arrives at its second first light, and hope now grows, and frigid midnight shall not persist. She may even die. Heaven's first light creates a space as life's cold despair dampens all hope for warmth and growth. Dawn's first light may soon become enamored as colorless patience marches out of night, and brother dusk is guaranteed to soon arrive. Poem number 6. Cocks like to doodle-doo down the valley. On the farm I cannot see. In morning's foggy drizzle down the way. Poem number 7. If only March would arrive before February freezes, we might march to April sooner and have an extra month to plant some seeds and harvest more sooner rather than later. Now somehow my mind's gone awry in my deconstruct of Mother Nature's silent plan, sure as a windy, wintry blizzard, sure and still as humid July. Try as I might to impose my mind on Mother Nature's wisdom, whose decide and manage makes for no surprise. This, by her decision, reminds my mind of her mind to deconstruct, as hands fail to hold things tight, and feet's walk stumbles by times, and breath's wind lacks depth, and hair's not there as eyes squint, and ears hear so much less. This old body's demise finally resembles that old rag of a once new shirt of which I was once more than proud. Poem number 8. At 3 or 4 or 5, I resided in a dark corner, in a dark house during very dark days. Dark were the unseen rings around my eyes, darker yet the filth gathered under socks, and darkest of all was the space all around, into which no warm hand came, even kind words did not penetrate, inside this dark rag with 2 black eyes. Cockroaches startle my skin, and a rat or 2 nonchalantly passes by, seeking his dark hole in the wall in my dark corner. They must have been unseen in this home of dark. Dark days indeed, one might say. Dark days that colored future days and nights. As I cowered beneath covers, my eyes hidden in folds of pretend comfort. Even now in later life I see how dark has uncolored my life, as my sight betrayed a dense dark that never dissolved in my gut and on my grimace. This charcoal portrait of me will sit on some mantel somewhere, and other eyes will pass by as I smudge my way to unrecognized. I never had any thought of hope, to somehow escape, as I knew nothing of heaven or hell. Like for children born in wartime, a dark corner becomes a safe place to reside. One day I recall I climbed on a chair to the kitchen sink where I discovered the only mirror in the house. There I was, seeing me for the very first time. Eyes big as plates and black with gloomy stare, and snot and dirt, and there I was all alone. Even now I feel the shock and pain that never left my gut. Poem number 9. At 4 or 5. My soul has been, so it seems, an obvious factor in my little life, but it hides from me with the rise of my petty, arrogant wants that pretend to know thus and so. At 4 or 5, I recall being stuck behind all the tightly bound shoulders when I was sitting on the old wooden pew in a creaky church where they say there were more statues than people. At 4 or 5, for me, this little church had no politics, no history I knew of, just the rituality of incense and song drawing my heart into my mind. When I settled down, my eyes focused forward to witness the raised host, and I was awestruck and silent and still. When I fidgeted, I got a good slap, but my eyes were unfettered as the host rose. It was then I heard a whisper rise somewhere in my soul, but whispers get swallowed up by the clamor and the noise. We joined hands in our procession out, but my heart somehow never left my seat in my pew. Then I was led very, very astray by many things for many a year, and so life began. Poem number 10. It being Sunday and all, our best suits had been pressed, and we walked like kings and queens in our Sunday procession to the cross. Our menial lives in factories or on the cruel land were transformed by starched white shirts chafing every neck, plus the ill-fitting suit my grandpa tailored just for little me, hat and all. We kings and queens, once a week, we gathered with other kings and queens. We all paraded to the holiest events of our puny lives, and all followed in suit. This grand event of the week left little me in awe, hardly able to gasp. And if by chance it was a solemn high mass, with incense and all the rest, we were twice blessed. We kings and queens were crowned for 1 in 7, and then Monday broke. Poem number 11. Terrified by the tiger's jaws. I was only 12 or 13 then, and only now I see and know that youth has serious drawbacks. Stupidity and fear on top of the rack. Twice the tiger opened his jaws right before my eyes with teeth that glistened, and then I realized just how deep fear was in that 12-year-old brain. Jaws opened, shadows lifted. I panted frantic and screamed silent screams. Many minutes passed and then it all dissipated to pure nothingness. By day, I sat on an expansive beach that was holding the ocean at bay, sitting quiet, thunder rattled, my tender young brain unable to contain such fear and pain. Impending terror arose, and I shuddered off the pain in my brain, and the beach, once again, still contained the bay. By night, I walked the black tar road, lined with even blacker trees, flanked by the periodic hum of power lines to encourage me along. The trees opened out of black down the road to reveal black jaws of midnight in the summer sky. Christ shone himself outlined by receding trees, and he glowed and commanded. I shook with an unknown terror of being devoured, yet I knew not to stop walking straight into his awful jaws. And then, at the end, Christ too merged into the summer sky, and I once again was freed from the jaws of God, to my lifelong dismay. Poem number 12. If something can be seen instead of being guessed about, like moth's powdery wings on my still windowsill. If something can be known instead of being hypothesized about, like some real live birth of a horse or a cow sparkling in all its dead afterbirth, it would seem then that birthing is Mother Nature's only reality, even though mankind prefers to wield an evil hand of pretend. And I, turning my eyes away for even a briefest second, stop running about, like some newly born whomever who opens eyes for the very first time. Poem number 13, a quote from Lao Tzu. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. The word that can be spoken is not the eternal word. Poem 13. A cheap thief. Poetry is a useful metaphor for life, but it is not life. Words pretend to act like they're alive, but they are not. And always words get in the way of seeing with a simple eye. Ritual may be full of signs and symbols, like warning traffic lights, but they are not the way that Lao Tzu speaks of. Mankind's many minds like to make things what they are not. Belief and concept seem to be a perfect thing, but they too will have their death, as surely as their life. That cheap thief of mind likes to clutter one single eye. Poem 14. On the production line of poetry, the racing mind stops, forced by line breaks and rests and many, many commas that punctuate some matter or the other. Sequential operations convey an assembly of parts of speech to be welded together in perpetual repetition. Yet somehow, The poem steps off the line to find its own peculiar perfection, like the accomplished singer singing off the beat. As the product now assumes its own color and rhyme, some resemblance to all the others can easily be recognized. Shakespeare's family is clearly seen, juxtaposed to a gang of modernists, and the complicated rhythms of Hindu texts create another town of poetry down the way. The assembly line is forced to impose certain functional standards like 2 arms, 2 legs, and 2 eyes. Poems grow like the birth of the blues, or a new Naples opera, or even Fleetwood Mac.